John Naylor had always loved working with his father in Middleton's smithy. Even as a child, he helped in any way he could, enjoying the sound of hammer striking anvil and the pungent smells from the furnace, which burned as red as his hair. John and his father, occasionally assisted by his younger sister Elaine, crafted or repaired anything their local community needed, from nails to horseshoes, belt buckles to cooking utensils. As he grew into manhood, John filled out, becoming heavily muscled and much taller than anyone else in town, leading to his ironic nickname, Little John. Although his family usually had enough to eat, John felt like the work he and his father did at the smithy was never properly rewarded. What little profit they did make was taken by the state tax collectors. Once, John asked his father why they didn't repair or even craft arms and armor. A good sword would earn them much more than a dozen cooking pots or door hinges. A strange, sad light had come into his father's eyes as he made it clear that the tools of war would never be their business, without explaining why he felt that way. One day, when fighting off a gang of bullies, John discovered a natural talent for violence. He began honing these skills, training and challenging his aggression in the hopes of earning money in Middleton's illicit fighting dens. When his father died suddenly, John had to spend every waking hour in the smithy on his own, and production inevitably dropped, as did his hopes of earning money as a fighter. A new opportunity arose when a state patrol rode through their town. Such visits were becoming more commonplace, as the authorities had long suspected the people of Middleton of harboring outlaws. The captain's horse needed a new shoe, and when the work was done, he asked John to repair some damage to his armor. For a moment, the giant smith hesitated, remembering his father's words, but the captain, Sir Thomas de Boron, promised to pay handsomely, and thinking of the bare larder in their house, Little John nodded agreement. He had to learn fast, for replacing links in the fine suit of chainmail required rather different techniques to forging a sturdy ladle. But it seemed he had a gift for the work, and the state captain was very happy with the repairs. Happy enough to offer the young smith more work, John accepted the contract immediately, and his profits rose dramatically. From then on, when the tax collectors came to collect their dues, John had enough to pay them off, with some left over. As his income grew, so did the young smith's standing with the townsfolk. Yet, as he spent more time around the higher-ranking state soldiers and the so-called nobles of his town, John started to notice more and more the corruption and injustice these people thrived upon, and it weighed upon his mind. Sir Thomas de Boron rode into town one afternoon, leading a detachment of his soldiers and a wagon piled with arms and armor needing minor repairs. Some of the pieces were still blood-stained. He sent the soldiers off to enjoy an ale at the inn, then turned to John, taking the smith's raised eyebrow as a question. De Boron casually informed John that they had been forced to put down a riot in a village a few miles to the north. They refused to pay their taxes, Sir Thomas said, by way of an explanation. It took John a moment before he properly understood the knight's statement. His mind drew a map of the farming settlements to the north that might just be big enough to offer resistance to De Boron's troop, and only one fitted the bill. His fears were confirmed when he noticed a massive hammer inscribed with runes amongst a pile of damaged weapons on the ground. It had belonged to a blacksmith John had known since childhood, and a black rage suddenly filled him. He understood now why his father had wanted no part in repairing instruments of death. "You murdering bastard," he said, almost inaudibly as he rose to his full height, head almost touching the rafters. For a moment, Sir Thomas de Boron simply stared at him in surprise, but that quickly gave way to cold anger, and he stepped back a pace, drawing a dagger from his belt, confident but understandably wary of getting into a fight with the hot-headed blacksmith. Just then, a bent-backed old woman came into the smithy. Wandering between the angry men, a confused look on her heavily lined face. John hesitated, but Sir Thomas saw an opportunity. He reached out and grabbed the smith's mother, pulling her roughly against him and holding the blade up to her neck. The knight only intended to use her as a hostage, to keep John at bay until he could get out of the stifling building and call for his soldiers. The old lady tried to twist out of Sir Thomas's grasp, furious at being handled so roughly. Whether intentionally or not, in the struggle, the knight's wickedly sharp blade sliced directly across the elderly woman's neck, severing the carotid artery. If John had been sickened by the dried blood caking the state soldier's armor, he was utterly shocked by the crimson fountain that cascaded from his mother's wound. De Boron lunged towards him, blade outstretched. The blacksmith's instincts kicked in, and he dodged sideways, punching the knight in the mouth and grasping him roughly by the hair. Using all of the power in his enormous arms, John slammed De Boron's face into the iron anvil, feeling bone crack and splinter beneath his hand. But his fury wasn't spent yet. He hauled De Boron's head upwards, only to smash it into the hard iron again, and again, and again. Tears blurred his vision, perhaps mercifully obscuring the bloody mess he'd made of the state officer's face. And he knelt by his already dead mother's side, caressing her hand. Soon enough, he realized Sir Thomas's men would come looking for their captain, and John would be done for. He knew he would need a decent weapon to defend himself. His eyes fell to the blacksmith's hammer on the floor. The sound of the half-drunk men approaching came to him, and with a last sorrowful glance at his mother's corpse, he ran out of the forge and deep into the trees that fringed the town. He knew standing alone against the soldiers would be suicide. For 2 days, little John remained in the forest, until at last he ventured home to check on his sister Elaine. His neighbors told him sorrowfully that she'd been arrested and taken to work off John's debt in one of the state's many brothels. The soldiers also promised to return and hunt the smith down like an animal. They did much more than that, however, using John's crime as an excuse to deal with the rebellious people of Middleton once and for all. Soldiers came in force and, without warning, smashed the dam that held back the waters of Lake Grimwith. The entire town was inundated, destroying everything and making all who survived the floods homeless and destitute. To complete this destruction, the state renamed Middleton as Newton Abbas, and John's home was wiped from the land forever. So little John was forced back into the Greenwood, where he was eventually adopted by the outlaw captain known as Hood. For 3 years, he served loyally as an important member of the notorious gang. His great size, ferocious fighting style, combined with his intimate knowledge of state armor and its weak points, eventually earned him the position of second in command to the legendary Hood. John surreptitiously tracked his captured sister's movements. The state transferred her from one brothel to another, and the giant former blacksmith vowed to one day free her from her vile servitude. That day had not yet come when Hood was apparently slain by a bounty hunter, and his entire gang was scattered to the four winds. The new sheriff's soldiers seemed able to track him better than they ever could in the past. Just a few days ago, he had set up camp, alone, at a site he and Hood used a year or so before. It was well off the beaten track, and he'd lit no campfires, yet a patrol of soldiers came upon him without warning, and he'd almost been killed. Mercifully, a longbowman, who was no friend to the state, heard the fight and came to John's aid, saving his life. Now, the former blacksmith hopes that this new archer, a newcomer to the Greenwood, can turn their fortunes around and strike once again at the despised state, perhaps even taking the legendary mantle of Hood upon himself. Then, John Naylor might fulfill the oath he swore to one day rescue his sister and bring brutal, bloody vengeance to those who destroyed Middleton.